In the first moments after death, there's no darkness, no oblivion, only awareness. Cayce said that for most souls, the realization comes gently, like waking from a deep sleep. You look around and still see the same room, the same faces, yet something feels lighter. You're not bound by the weight of breath or heartbeat anymore. You think of moving, and suddenly you are already across the room. There's no pain, no struggle, only a quiet curiosity, as if your mind has been freed from gravity itself. This is the soul's awakening, the sacred second birth that Jesus spoke of when he said, "You must be born again." It isn't a metaphor for religion, it's the law of the Spirit. Cayce described how some souls, upon leaving the body, feel an instant pull upward, while others remain near the earth for a short while, depending on their attachment to material life. Those who lived with faith, compassion, and forgiveness ascend smoothly. Those consumed by anger, greed, or guilt feel a certain heaviness until they accept light and release the past. The soul doesn't face punishment, it faces truth. That truth is love, reflected back through every thought, every act, every moment we lived on earth. During these early moments, Cayce said that thought becomes creation. What you think, you see. What you fear, you meet. What you love, you attract. It's as if God gives you an immediate mirror to understand your spiritual condition. For those who cultivated love and humility, this reflection is beautiful beyond words. A river of light, warm and peaceful. For those who neglected love, it's a call to awaken, not a sentence of suffering. Every soul, no matter how lost, is still guided by divine mercy. The Bible echoes this when Jesus told the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." That promise wasn't for the righteous. It was for the repentant heart. Cayce confirmed that no soul is abandoned. Even in confusion or darkness, helpers of light, angels, family spirits, and guides stand ready. They don't judge, they remind. They whisper gently, "You are not your mistakes. You are loved. You are eternal." If this message touches your heart, pause for a second. Leave a like on this video so it reaches more souls who need peace about death. And write in the comments if you've ever felt a presence of someone who has passed. I'll mark every heart myself. Now, back to those sacred first minutes. Cayce said that when the soul realizes it's free, gratitude floods in. Many souls see a soft radiance, what he called the light of God's memory. It's not outside you, it's within you, expanding. You feel a pull toward that light because it feels like home. The transition is never random. Cayce said the state of your heart at the final breath shapes the path of the soul's awakening. A mind at peace attracts higher vibration. A restless spirit takes longer to recognize divine order. This is why forgiveness and faith matter so deeply while we're still here. They build the spiritual body that carries us forward. Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions." Cayce interpreted that as realms of consciousness, planes of awareness where every soul continues its growth. The first moments after death are simply the doorway to one of those realms. He often compared death to walking through a fog that slowly clears. At first, shapes seem familiar yet distant. Then light breaks through, and the soul realizes it was never alone. Loved ones appear, not always as they looked physically, but radiant, whole, and vibrant. They come to comfort, not to cling. Cayce said they remind the new arrival that this is not the end but a continuation of purpose. Every soul is guided to review, to understand, and to prepare for the next lesson in its eternal journey toward oneness with God. In the next moments after death, the soul begins to feel drawn away from the world it once knew. Cayce explained that this is not a violent departure, but a natural return to vibration, like a wave flowing back to the ocean that gave it birth. Many souls sense a pathway of light forming ahead, a tunnel, a bridge, or sometimes a radiant field. These are not physical places, but symbols of movement toward higher consciousness. As the spirit moves through, the memories of pain and fear begin to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming realization. Everything that ever existed was connected by love. This is the instant when the soul sees life from God's perspective, not as a series of random events, but as a carefully woven pattern of growth, forgiveness, and grace. Cayce said the soul often meets what he called the Hall of Records, a space of awareness where the soul reviews its earthly life. It's not a courtroom, it's a classroom. You see every choice not through shame but understanding. You feel what others felt because of your words, your kindness, or your neglect. It's God's perfect justice expressed through compassion. The soul recognizes that every joy and every sorrow was a lesson designed to awaken love. This is what the Bible means when it says, "You will reap what you sow." It is not punishment, it is divine education. Each act of love becomes light. Each act of cruelty becomes a call for healing. During this review, Cayce said, "The soul may hear voices of those it affected, but not in accusation. They speak through the vibration of thought, forgiving or inviting forgiveness. It's a conversation of the heart, not of the mouth. The soul then decides, in harmony with divine law, what it must experience next to continue evolving." Jesus spoke of this when he said, "Be perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Perfection, in Cayce's interpretation, isn't about flawlessness. It's about returning to complete awareness of God's love. Each life, each death, is one more step toward that awakening. If you've ever lost someone and wondered if they can still feel your prayers, yes, they can. Cayce revealed that prayers of love and forgiveness act like light that reaches souls still adjusting to their new state. They sense that light and move toward it. That's why your prayers matter, not only for those living, but for those who have crossed over. When you speak their names with love, you help them find peace. So take a moment. If someone you love has passed, write their initials in the comments below as a silent prayer. I'll mark each with a heart, and together we'll send light to them. As the soul continues forward, the light becomes brighter, yet softer. It feels like returning to a place you've known forever. Cayce said that those who have prepared spiritually, through kindness, faith, and service, experience this transition as joy beyond words. They are greeted by guides, radiant beings who assist them in understanding where to go next. Some enter realms of rest, others move directly into dimensions of learning or service. It depends on the readiness of the soul, not on religious labels. Cayce often reminded that heaven and hell are states of mind, not locations. Heaven is awareness of God's love. Hell is separation from it. This truth echoes the parable of the prodigal son. The father never closed the door. The son simply had to remember the way home. Death is the same. No matter how far a soul has wandered, God waits with arms open, ready to receive. The first moments after death are God's gentle whisper saying, "Come home, my child. You were never lost." Cayce's readings remind us that we do not prepare for death by fearing it, but by living in alignment with Spirit now. The more love we practice on earth, the less fear we carry beyond it. As the soul rises further, Cayce said, it begins to sense harmony beyond anything known on earth. Time no longer feels linear. Instead, every moment feels eternal and filled with meaning. The soul begins to remember where it came from, its divine origin. Some described it as hearing a celestial music, not with ears but with consciousness itself, a vibration that resonates through every fiber of being. This music is the presence of God, the words spoken at creation, still echoing through eternity. Cayce connected this directly to the verse from John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. To the soul, this is no longer scripture, it's experience. In those first experiences of higher awareness, the soul understands that all separation was illusion. Every person, every life, every form of creation is one field of divine energy. Cayce often said that this realization is the beginning of true heaven. Heaven, he explained, isn't a golden city above the clouds. It's a state of unity where fear, guilt, and judgment dissolve completely. There is only light, understanding, and love. The soul is greeted by guides who help interpret what it sees, because the brightness can feel overwhelming. These guides are often the souls of loved ones or beings Cayce called the children of light, those who have served God through many lifetimes and now assist others. As the spirit grows comfortable in this realm, Cayce said, Christ himself may appear, not as a man in robes, but as radiant consciousness, pure compassion. The soul instantly recognizes him, no matter what religion it held on earth. His presence is not a test, it is homecoming. In his light, every pain dissolves, every question is answered. Cayce emphasized that Jesus is not the judge of souls, but their redeemer, the eternal pattern of divine love that lives within each of us. He is the bridge between human limitation and divine awareness. Meeting him in the afterlife is like remembering the truest part of yourself, the spark of God that never died. For those who lived without faith, Cayce said, the meeting with Christ is not punishment, but awakening. The light reveals who they really are, souls of infinite worth who simply forgot. Some turn away briefly, ashamed of their choices, but his compassion never changes. Come unto me, he says, all who are weary, and even in death they come, because in that realm, truth is irresistible. This is why Cayce urged people to seek God now, not through fear of judgment, but through love of truth. Death doesn't end our journey, it magnifies it. Every lesson unfinished in life becomes the first lesson of eternity. If this reflection brings peace to your heart, take a moment and share this video with someone who fears death. Let's fill the world with understanding instead of fear. Comment below how you imagine heaven feels. I'll heart your comment personally, because when we speak of the afterlife, we are also speaking of life itself. Cayce said the greatest discovery after death is that love is never wasted. Every prayer, every act of kindness, every tear shed for someone, it all lives on, forming the very substance of heaven. And perhaps the most beautiful truth of all is this: those you love are not gone. They are near, closer than breath. They visit you in dreams, in sudden warmth, in moments of peace you cannot explain. Cayce confirmed that the boundary between worlds is not a wall, but a veil, thin, luminous, and responsive to thought. When you think of them with love, they feel it. When you pray for them, it reaches them. And when you finally cross over, they will be there, waiting, smiling, saying, "We told you love never ends." As the soul continues its ascent, Cayce said it eventually reaches a point of perfect stillness, a place of awareness where all longing turns into understanding. Here the soul no longer asks, "Why did this happen?" because it sees how every event, joyful or painful, was part of its divine education. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The truth is that life and death are two halves of the same breath. Nothing that was loved is ever lost. In that silence, the soul feels God not as a distant ruler, but as the essence within every heartbeat, every sunrise, every act of forgiveness. Cayce explained that once the soul regains clarity, it enters what he called the planes of preparation, realms where it rests, learns, and plans its next steps in the eternal journey. Some souls remain in these heavenly dimensions for what would seem like centuries in earthly time. Others, guided by compassion, choose to return to the material world to serve and grow. Reincarnation, in Cayce's words, is not a punishment, but a gift, another opportunity to express divine love more fully. Each life is a continuation of the last, shaped by choices and spiritual desires. It's God's way of giving us endless chances to learn how to love as He loves. In these higher planes, Cayce said, souls meet their spiritual families, groups that travel together through lifetimes, supporting one another's growth. Bonds of love never break, they simply shift across dimensions. That's why we feel deep, instant connections with some people on Earth. Our souls recognize them. We have walked together before. Cayce often reminded his followers that the relationships we build here continue after death, refined by forgiveness and strengthened by understanding. Heaven isn't solitude, it's reunion. The soul also learns that every thought creates vibration, and those vibrations shape worlds. Cayce described how souls help build spiritual environments suited to their level of consciousness. The purest souls live amid radiant beauty, where colors sing and light moves like music. Others dwell in gentler places of healing, where they rest and regain balance. But none are abandoned. All are moving toward the same divine center. It's as if creation itself is a vast classroom, and every soul is both student and teacher, learning that love is the only truth. And yet, Cayce insisted that the ultimate goal isn't to escape Earth forever. It's to bring heaven into the earth through how we live. He said, "Spirit is the life, mind is the builder, the physical is the result. Every thought of kindness, every act of service becomes a brick in the foundation of the world to come. When we forgive, we create light. When we love, we open a channel for God to act through us. Death reveals this truth instantly, but life gives us the chance to practice it daily. So, the next time you fear death, remember this. What Cayce and Jesus both taught is that there is no death, only transition. When the body rests, the soul continues. When the heart stops, love flows on. And when we finally awaken on the other side, we will realize that heaven was never far away. It was within us all along. Let this message fill you with peace. If it did, leave a comment saying, "I am eternal," and I'll heart each one myself. Together, we remind the world that no life, no soul, no love ever truly ends. And now, as this reflection comes to its close, imagine what Cayce wanted each of us to understand most deeply, that life is not about avoiding death, but about preparing to live forever. He said that every breath we take is a conversation between body and soul, a reminder that spirit is our true nature. The first moments after death only reveal what has always been hidden inside us, the divine spark that never fades. What we learn there, we are meant to practice here. Each act of forgiveness on earth builds a bridge of light in heaven. Each prayer whispered for another strengthens the bond between worlds. This is why Jesus taught, "The kingdom of God is within you." He wasn't speaking of a distant paradise, but of the consciousness that already connects us to eternity. Cayce often reminded his followers that heaven is not reached by dying, but by awakening. Every day we die a little to the illusions of fear, pride, and resentment, and we are reborn into greater awareness. The same process that happens in the first moments after death happens in small ways, every time we choose love instead of judgment. Every sunrise, every act of compassion is a rehearsal for eternity. When we leave this body, the transition will not frighten us, because we will have already learned to live in light. The goal is not to seek escape, but to align with God so completely that death itself becomes just another step in the dance of creation. Think of those you love who have gone before you. They are not lost, they are evolving. They cheer for you from realms of light, waiting for the day you will remember them in spirit. When you think of them, do not weep as if they are gone. Speak to them in prayer. Thank them for the lessons they gave you. Cayce said that when we think of those in spirit with gratitude, they draw closer, and both worlds are healed. So tonight, before you sleep, close your eyes and whisper, "We will meet again." Because in the design of God, love always fulfills its promise. Death is not the end, it is the opening of the eternal eye. The moment you let go, you awaken in the arms of the one who created you. The Bible says, "Neither death nor life nor anything else in all creation can separate us from the love of God." That is the final truth that Cayce confirmed over and over. Nothing real can ever be lost. Your soul is real. Your love is real. And God's plan for you is eternal. So live with courage, forgive often, and remember, when your first moments after death arrive, they will not be filled with fear, but with recognition. You will look upon the light and realize you've been home all along. If this message brought you peace, share this video with someone you love. Let's help the world see death not as the end, but as the continuation of life in its purest form. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to keep learning from the wisdom of Edgar Cayce and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And remember, one day when we open our eyes beyond this world, we'll finally understand that nothing dies, because love never does. Edgar Cayce told desperate families throughout the 1930s that their dying children could recover through his specific remedies involving castor oil packs and dietary changes. In documented case after documented case, children given days to live by doctors made full recoveries when families followed his exact instructions. But here's what's even more shocking about these cases. They weren't just about physical healing. The sleeping prophet, as he became known, spent 43 years channeling information that would challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and what happens in between. With over 14,000 documented readings recorded by stenographers and preserved in Virginia Beach, Cayce's work represents the most extensive collection of psychic material ever assembled by one person. But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. In reading after reading, the same messages kept coming through from those who had crossed over. 10 specific things that the deceased desperately wanted the living to understand. If you're ready to discover what your loved ones are trying to tell you from the other side, hit that subscribe button now, because this information could change how you view death forever. The first thing the dead want you to know will shock you. They're not really gone. In documented cases throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Cayce was asked about recently deceased family members. What came through shocked even his stenographer. The deceased weren't just present during the readings, they were actively participating, giving specific details about family matters that only they could have known, including locations of important papers their families couldn't find. This wasn't unusual for Cayce. Throughout thousands of readings, he consistently reported that consciousness survives physical death intact. The personality, memories, and emotional connections remain. Death, according to what came through Cayce's readings, is simply a change of address, not an ending. But here's what terrified some of his clients. The dead were often more aware of earthly situations than when they were alive. They could see the bigger picture, understand family dynamics more clearly, and desperately wanted to help their loved ones navigate challenges. Think about this for a moment. Right now, as you're watching this, according to Cayce's findings, deceased loved ones may be more present in your life than they ever were when walking beside you. They want you to stop grieving so intensely. In multiple emotionally charged readings, Cayce channeled fathers who had died in accidents. The messages that came through were urgent and clear. Excessive grief from their families was actually holding these deceased fathers back from progressing spiritually. This revelation appeared consistently in Cayce's work. The dead understand that grief is natural and necessary, but prolonged intense mourning creates energetic bonds that can impede their spiritual development. They want their loved ones to know they're safe, they're learning, and they're growing. But wait, here's the part that changes everything about how we should handle loss. The deceased repeatedly communicated through Cayce that celebration of their life and memories actually helps them advance spiritually, while prolonged despair creates confusion and delays their progress. They want to be remembered with joy, not chains of sorrow. In 3 minutes, I'll reveal the case that terrified even Cayce's assistants. But first, you need to understand what the dead say about unfinished business. Forgiveness is their biggest concern. During the war years, Cayce conducted numerous readings for families who had lost soldiers. One consistent message emerged. The deceased were deeply concerned about unresolved conflicts and unforgiveness between family members. In a reading that shocked his stenographer, a deceased soldier communicated that watching his family torn apart by old grudges was causing him more pain than his death had caused them. The dead, according to Cayce's extensive archives, maintain emotional connections to their loved ones and suffer when they witness ongoing family dysfunction. But here's what's fascinating. They also have expanded perspective on these conflicts. They can see how petty many arguments were, how pride and ego destroyed relationships unnecessarily. They desperately want their loved ones to forgive each other and themselves. The dead understand something the living often miss, that holding grudges only hurts the person carrying the anger. From their expanded awareness, they see how forgiveness liberates not just the forgiven, but especially the forgiver. They're trying to send signs. In documented cases throughout the 1930s, Cayce repeatedly accessed information showing that the deceased actively attempt to communicate with their loved ones through various signs and synchronicities. But here's the problem: most people dismiss these attempts as coincidence. According to archived readings, the dead work within natural laws to create meaningful coincidences, influence dreams, and arrange for specific songs, numbers, or symbols to appear at precisely the right moments. They understand the spiritual mechanics of how consciousness can influence physical reality. But wait, this is where Cayce discovered something that will give you chills. The deceased reported through his readings that modern life's distractions and skepticism make it increasingly difficult for them to get through to their loved ones. They have to work harder and be more creative to capture attention in our noisy, disconnected world. Your prayers and thoughts reach them. In one of his most documented cases, Cayce channeled a grandmother who specifically mentioned the prayers her granddaughter said for her every night. She described feeling strengthened by these loving thoughts and explained how they actually helped her spiritual progress. This pattern appeared consistently. The dead receive and benefit from the loving thoughts, prayers, and positive intentions sent their way by the living. These spiritual connections transcend physical death and create real energetic support for those transitioning to higher realms. Here's what Cayce's work revealed that most people don't realize. Your thoughts about deceased loved ones aren't just private memories. They're active communications that provide comfort, strength, and assistance to those learning to navigate their new existence. But here's the case that terrified even Cayce's most experienced assistants. They warn about spiritual dangers. During a session in 1936, something unprecedented happened. A deceased father came through with urgent warnings about his living son's involvement with dangerous occult practices. The message was so intense and specific about spiritual dangers that Cayce's stenographer later said she felt physically cold during the entire reading. The archives contain multiple instances where the deceased warned their loved ones about spiritual practices, relationships, or decisions that could lead to harmful consequences. From their expanded awareness, they could see spiritual realities invisible to those still in physical form. According to Cayce's documented work, the dead understand that consciousness continues after death, which means choices about spiritual practices, moral decisions, and character development have eternal consequences. They desperately want to protect their loved ones from spiritual harm. They understand the purpose of suffering. In reading after reading, Cayce accessed information showing that the deceased gain expanded understanding about why certain challenges, illnesses, and losses occur during earthly life. What seemed random or cruel from the limited human perspective reveals itself as purposeful from their elevated awareness. A documented case from the late 1930s involved a mother who had lost multiple children to illness. Through Cayce's reading, these children communicated that their brief lives had served specific spiritual purposes, both for their own soul development and for their family's spiritual growth. This doesn't mean the dead are callous about earthly suffering. Rather, they understand the bigger picture of how souls use physical experiences for learning and growth. They want their loved ones to know that no suffering is meaningless, even when its purpose isn't immediately apparent. They're preparing a place for you. In verified cases throughout Cayce's career, the deceased consistently communicated that they actively prepare for eventual reunions with their loved ones. This isn't passive waiting. They're engaged in learning and developing capabilities that will enhance these future meetings. According to archived readings, those who cross over often describe continued relationships with other deceased family members and friends. They form spiritual communities where they support each other's development and plan for how to assist and eventually reunite with loved ones still in physical form. But here's what will blow your mind about this preparation process. The dead reportedly use their expanded awareness to help orchestrate events and opportunities in their loved ones' lives. From their higher perspective, they can see possibilities and connections invisible to physical awareness, and they work to help create beneficial circumstances. Reincarnation is real, and relationships continue. Throughout thousands of past life readings, Cayce consistently accessed information showing that souls reincarnate to continue learning and that significant relationships span multiple lifetimes. The deceased understand this continuity and often referenced previous incarnations together with their living loved ones. In documented cases, the dead communicated that current relationships are part of ongoing spiritual partnerships designed to help all participants grow and evolve. They see beyond the temporary separation of physical death to the eternal nature of love and connection. This perspective radically changes how we understand loss. According to Cayce's extensive archives, death represents a temporary separation in an eternal relationship, not an ending. The consciousness that loves you now will continue to love you across lifetimes. They want you to develop your spiritual gifts, In one of his most revealing readings, Cayce channeled a deceased spiritualist who urged her living daughter to develop her own psychic abilities. The message emphasized that everyone possesses intuitive capabilities, but most people ignore or suppress these spiritual gifts. The archives contain numerous instances where the deceased encouraged their loved ones to meditate, pray, study spiritual teachings, and practice developing their own direct connection to higher realms. They understand that spiritual development is the most important work anyone can do during physical life. From their expanded awareness, the dead see how spiritual gifts can transform earthly life, bringing guidance, healing, peace, and purpose. They desperately want their loved ones to access these same capabilities while still in physical form. But here's the final message that appeared in reading after reading, and it's the most important thing the dead want you to understand. The consistent message throughout Cayce's documented work was that love truly is eternal, and that consciousness continues to grow and develop after physical death. The deceased want their loved ones to live fully, love deeply, forgive completely, and develop spiritually while still having the opportunity of physical incarnation. They see earthly life as a precious opportunity for spiritual growth that shouldn't be wasted on trivial concerns, ongoing resentments, or spiritual neglect. Every day in physical form offers chances for learning, service, and soul development that the deceased wish they had appreciated more fully while alive. Death, according to what consistently came through Cayce's readings, is not the opposite of life. It's the continuation of consciousness in a different form. The relationships, love, and spiritual connections formed during earthly life continue beyond physical death, growing stronger and more meaningful as both the living and dead continue their eternal journey of spiritual evolution. Your deceased loved ones want you to know they're safe, they're growing, they love you eternally, and they're waiting to share with you everything they've learned when your time comes to join them in expanded awareness. The most documented psychic in human history spent 43 years proving that consciousness survives death and that love transcends every boundary, including the grave. These aren't just comforting beliefs. According to Cayce's extensive archives, they're spiritual realities verified through thousands of documented readings. If this information has opened your mind to possibilities you've never considered, subscribe now for more revelations from Edgar Cayce's extraordinary legacy. Like this video if it's helped you understand death and spiritual continuation in a new way, and share it with anyone who needs to know that their loved ones are truly not gone. They're just living in expanded awareness, waiting to be reunited with those they love. But wait, there's something else the dead desperately want you to know, and it's so important that it appeared in over half of Cayce's death-related readings. They see your life purpose clearly. In a case that stunned researchers at Cayce, Cayce channeled a deceased businessman who provided his living son with specific guidance about a career change that seemed financially risky. The father could see from his expanded awareness that this path would lead to both material success and spiritual fulfillment. When the son followed this guidance despite family objections, he built one of the most successful companies in his industry. Here's what's incredible about this pattern. The deceased consistently demonstrated in Cayce's readings that they could see their loved one's highest potential and life purpose with crystal clarity. Death had removed the limitations of physical perspective, allowing them to perceive the perfect unfolding of each person's spiritual mission. The archives contain case after case where the deceased provided specific career guidance, relationship advice, and life direction that led to extraordinary outcomes when followed. They understand that every person incarnates with specific lessons to learn and gifts to share with the world. But here's what will blow your mind about how this actually works. They influence your dreams to guide you. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Cayce documented numerous cases where the deceased appeared in dreams to provide crucial guidance, warnings, or comfort to their loved ones. But these weren't just random dream visits. They were carefully orchestrated communications designed to help the living make important decisions. In one verified case, a widow received detailed instructions through dreams from her deceased husband about investments that saved her family from financial ruin during the Great Depression. The specificity and accuracy of this guidance amazed even Cayce's most skeptical associates. The archived readings reveal that the deceased understand dream states as optimal times for communication because the conscious mind's resistance is lowered. They can more easily impress important information, provide comfort during difficult transitions, and offer guidance about upcoming challenges. Think about this carefully. That vivid dream you had about your deceased loved one might not have been just your subconscious processing grief. According to Cayce's documented findings, it could have been an actual visit with specific information meant to help you navigate your current circumstances. The dying process is actually beautiful. In readings conducted for families watching loved ones transition, Cayce consistently accessed information showing that the actual moment of death involves profound spiritual experiences invisible to physical observers. The dying person often sees deceased relatives, experiences overwhelming love and peace, and gains immediate understanding about their earthly life's purpose and meaning. A documented case from 1938 involved a woman whose husband was dying of cancer. Through Cayce's reading, she learned that her husband was already spending time in spiritual realms during his unconscious periods, meeting with deceased family members and preparing for his transition. When he finally passed, his face showed such peace that the attending physician remarked he'd never seen anything like it. But here's what the deceased want their loved ones to understand about this process. Physical death is often a relief after prolonged illness, and the actual crossing over involves experiences of such beauty and love that they wouldn't return to physical limitations even if given the choice. They want their families to stop fearing death and instead understand it as a graduation to expanded awareness and capabilities. They work together to help the living. One of the most fascinating patterns in Cayce's archives involves deceased family members working together from higher realms to assist their living relatives. In multiple documented cases, entire groups of deceased relatives collaborated to help solve problems, provide opportunities, or protect their loved ones from harm. In a case that amazed researchers, Cayce channeled information about 3 deceased brothers working together to help their living sister find her missing child. They provided specific locations to search and influenced helpful people to be in the right places at the right times. The child was found safely exactly where the deceased brothers had indicated. This reveals something extraordinary about consciousness after death. The deceased maintain relationships with each other and actively coordinate their efforts to assist the living. They form spiritual support networks that transcend individual concerns and work collectively for the highest good of their earthly families. Your spiritual development affects them. Here's something that appeared consistently in Cayce's readings that will change how you view your daily choices. Your spiritual growth and moral development directly impact your deceased loved ones. When you evolve spiritually, it creates positive effects that reach into higher realms and actually helps their continued development. In documented cases, the deceased expressed gratitude when their living relatives engaged in prayer, meditation, service to others, and spiritual study. These activities created energetic connections that supported both the living and the dead in their respective growth processes. But here's the flip side that shocked many of Cayce's clients: negative behaviors, spiritual neglect, and moral decline by the living could create disturbances that affected their deceased relatives' progress. This isn't punishment, but rather the natural result of consciousness being interconnected across all levels of existence. The message that came through repeatedly was that spiritual development is never a purely individual endeavor. It affects everyone connected to you, both in physical and spiritual realms. They understand karma and soul lessons. Throughout thousands of readings, Cayce accessed information showing that the deceased gain complete understanding of karmic patterns and soul lessons that were often unclear during physical life. They could see how relationships, challenges, and opportunities were perfectly designed to facilitate spiritual growth. In one remarkable case, a deceased mother communicated through Cayce that her difficult relationship with her daughter during life had been necessary for both souls' development. She could now see how their conflicts had forced both of them to develop patience, forgiveness, and unconditional love. What had seemed like family dysfunction was actually spiritual curriculum designed by their souls before incarnation. This expanded awareness allows the deceased to forgive completely, understand perfectly, and appreciate the spiritual perfection in even the most challenging earthly experiences. They want their loved ones to develop this same perspective while still in physical form. Medical conditions have spiritual meanings. In thousands of health readings, Cayce consistently accessed information showing that physical illnesses often reflect spiritual imbalances or karmic patterns. The deceased, with their expanded awareness, understand these connections and often attempt to communicate healing insights to their living loved ones. A documented case involved a man with chronic digestive problems whose deceased father communicated through Cayce that the illness stemmed from harbored resentment and unforgiveness. When the man addressed these emotional patterns, his physical symptoms resolved completely. The archives contain numerous similar cases where the deceased provided specific insights about the spiritual roots of physical conditions. They understand that true healing often requires addressing consciousness patterns, not just physical symptoms. But here's what's most important about this understanding. The deceased want their loved ones to know that illness can be a pathway to spiritual awakening when approached with the right perspective. Physical challenges often catalyze the spiritual growth that souls came to Earth to achieve. The Sleeping Prophet's work continues to offer hope, healing, and spiritual understanding to anyone ready to explore the mysteries of consciousness and the eternal nature of love. This video addresses one of the most delicate and painful subjects that Edgar Cayce ever touched: the journey of the soul after suicide. Before we move forward, I want to make something very clear. What you are about to hear is shared with the deepest respect for those who have suffered, for families who have carried this pain, and for anyone who has ever faced the weight of despair. Cayce never spoke about this subject lightly. His words were meant to guide, to clarify, and to offer hope, even when the truth was difficult to hear. And today we will revisit some of those documented readings, always staying faithful to what he actually revealed. If this theme resonates with you, I invite you to stay until the end of the video, reflect deeply, and also share your perspective in the comments below. I'll personally mark your comment with a little heart, because your voice matters here. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe, so this message can reach more people who might need it. In one of his most striking readings during the 1930s, at the height of the Great Depression, Cayce was asked about what happens to a soul that chooses to end its own life. His response was both compassionate and sobering. He explained that the soul does not escape suffering by leaving the body. Instead, it enters a dimension where it must confront, even more intensely, the lessons it tried to abandon. According to him, suicide interrupts the natural rhythm of the soul's journey, creating a form of spiritual disorientation. But, and this is crucial, Cayce never described eternal punishment. He insisted that every soul remains loved, guided, and given opportunities to heal, though the path may be much longer and heavier after such an act. His words carried a sense of gravity, but also a reminder of divine patience. During one particular session in Virginia Beach, Cayce spoke about how souls who die by suicide often linger close to the earthly plane, still attached to the emotions, places, and even the bodies they left behind. He described them as being near yet unseen, struggling to understand what had happened. For families who asked him about loved ones who had taken their own lives, his readings were filled with both honesty and tenderness. He did not hide the difficulties faced by these souls, but he also emphasized that prayer, love, and sincere intercession could help them find light and move forward. For Cayce, no soul was ever truly abandoned. Divine mercy was always present, even in the darkest circumstances. Cayce's descriptions often shocked those listening. He would say that a suicide soul could remain in a state of confusion, replaying the circumstances that led to their act, almost like being caught in a loop of memory and emotion. This was not described as punishment from an external force, but as a natural consequence of the mind and spirit being unable to detach from unresolved experiences. And yet, in these very moments of despair, Cayce affirmed that guides, loved ones from the other side, and higher beings of light would work tirelessly to bring understanding and healing. The process could take years, even decades in the spiritual sense, but the goal was never condemnation. The goal was restoration. At times, Cayce warned that repeated patterns of despair could carry over into future incarnations. He explained that the lessons a soul avoids by suicide are not erased, but postponed, often reappearing in the next life with similar challenges. This perspective reframed the act not as an escape, but as a delay where suffering might resurface in a new body, a new time, and under new circumstances. For him, the soul was on a long journey of growth, and no single act, no matter how tragic, could sever it from God's ultimate love and purpose. He placed immense weight on the importance of patience, perseverance, and seeking help in this life, rather than trying to cut the journey short. Cayce also pointed out something that many people found surprisingly comforting. He said that the prayers of the living truly reach the souls of those who have died by suicide. According to him, when a family prays with sincerity, or when friends send thoughts of compassion and forgiveness, these energies act as bridges of light that guide the disoriented soul toward healing. During one reading that deeply moved those present, Cayce explained that no thought of love is ever wasted. Every sincere prayer becomes a force that surrounds and uplifts the struggling spirit. This perspective transformed the way many families faced their grief. Instead of believing their loved one was forever lost, they began to understand that they could still contribute to that soul's journey toward peace. At another moment, during a session in Hopkinsville, Cayce was asked if suicide was ever justified. His answer was consistent and firm. The soul is never improved by cutting short its earthly experience. He said that life, even in the midst of unbearable suffering, carries opportunities for growth that cannot be replicated elsewhere. To end life prematurely was to interrupt an assignment, leaving unfinished lessons that would inevitably return. Yet, even as he stressed the seriousness of suicide, his tone was never cruel. He emphasized again and again that divine mercy surrounds all souls, and that God does not abandon anyone, not even those who felt abandoned by the world. The key message was both challenging and hopeful. The journey may be longer, but healing remains possible. Cayce's teachings during the war years reinforced this same understanding. With so many lives being lost to violence, despair, and chaos, questions about suicide became even more urgent. Families approached him in tears, desperate to know the fate of their loved ones. In those readings, he would often describe how the soul must return again to complete what was left undone. But he also offered hope, saying that God's patience is eternal, and that even after the darkest decisions, the soul retains the spark of divine origin. What was needed, he explained, was not judgment, but compassion, from both this world and the next. His words encouraged many to shift their perspective from fear to prayerful support. For Cayce, one of the greatest tragedies of suicide was the loneliness the soul feels immediately after crossing. He described how such souls often expect relief, but instead find themselves in a strange in-between state, aware of being outside the body, yet not fully ready to enter the realms of light. This confusion could feel like wandering in a fog, searching for direction. But even in this fog, Cayce said, there are helping presences. He spoke of spiritual guides, beings of light, and even relatives who had already passed, all working to reach the lost soul. These presences could not force the soul forward, but they could patiently stand by, waiting for the moment when the soul opens to receive help. And this is where Cayce introduced a perspective that touched many hearts. He reminded families that their continued love, forgiveness, and remembrance created channels of energy that made it easier for the lost soul to see and accept help. In other words, the connection between the living and the dead did not break with suicide. It became even more crucial. Those who carried grief could choose to transform it into healing energy for their loved one. This teaching not only gave families hope, but also gave them a sense of responsibility, a way to actively participate in the redemption of a soul they thought had been lost forever. In some of his most profound readings, Cayce made it clear that suicide was never the end of the story. He explained that while the act brings immense confusion, the soul eventually reaches a point of awakening. That moment may come slowly, after years of wandering in a state of unrest, or more quickly if surrounded by love and prayer. But when it comes, the soul recognizes that life cannot be escaped, it can only be transformed. Cayce described this awakening as both painful and liberating. painful because the soul sees clearly the weight of its choice, but liberating because it also realizes that the door to redemption was never closed. This was the balance he always brought, honesty about consequences, but also assurance of divine mercy. He also reminded people that suicide often arises from deep suffering, illness, or despair, and that God sees the heart behind the act. Unlike human judgment, divine understanding does not condemn without compassion. In one reading, Cayce said that the soul who takes its own life is not cast into eternal punishment, but rather into a process of confronting what was left unfinished. He compared it to leaving school before graduation. You may avoid one exam, but sooner or later you must return to complete the lesson. This metaphor helped many understand that suicide does not erase responsibility, but it also does not erase hope. The journey continues, and the soul is never outside the reach of divine love. Cayce often connected this subject to reincarnation. He explained that the challenges avoided by suicide would often reappear in a future life, sometimes with even greater intensity. A person who ended life due to poverty, illness, or broken relationships might face similar patterns again until the lesson was truly learned. Yet he emphasized that this was not punishment, but simply the law of cause and effect in action. The universe, he said, is built on balance, and every unfinished task eventually returns to be completed. This teaching was sobering, but it also gave meaning to suffering, showing that even in tragedy there was purpose and a path forward. It is important to note that Cayce never spoke about this subject to inspire fear. His intent was to awaken responsibility and compassion. He urged people to understand that while suicide creates real challenges, the greater truth is that no soul is ever abandoned. In fact, he said that the souls of those who die this way often become deeply aware of the value of life, and when they reincarnate, they carry within them a stronger determination to endure and to grow. In this sense, even the darkest choices can eventually lead to greater light. His perspective was one of both realism and redemption, a call to honor life while also trusting in God's infinite patience. For those listening in his time, and for us today, these words carry a heavy but important message. Life is sacred, even when unbearable pain makes it seem impossible to continue. Cayce's readings remind us that suicide does not end the soul's journey, it only complicates it. But more than that, they remind us that every soul, no matter how lost, is held by divine love. And for families and friends left behind, he gave a clear mission: pray, forgive, and send light, because your love still reaches them. And here, I want to pause to invite you, if you feel this message touches your heart, let us build a circle of compassion together. Leave a comment sharing your reflection on this theme, or simply write a word of light for those souls in pain. I'll personally mark your comment with a heart, because together we can transform grief into hope. And if you haven't yet, like this video, share it, and subscribe, so that these teachings can reach more people who might need them now. Cayce also emphasized that suicide often results from the crushing weight of isolation. He said that one of the greatest illusions a soul can experience while on earth is the belief that it is alone in its suffering. In his view, this illusion can grow so strong that it blinds a person to the truth, that help, love, and guidance are always available. During a session that changed the life of a grieving family, Cayce explained that many who take their own lives believed, in their final moments, that there was no other way. But from the perspective of the soul, once free from the body, they come to see that doors of possibility had always existed. The tragedy lies not only in the act itself, but in the blindness that precedes it. This teaching struck deeply because it shifted the focus from condemnation to compassion, reminding families to respond with love instead of judgment. He also described how souls who die by suicide can become intensely aware of the grief they leave behind. Far from escaping pain, they often witness the sorrow of loved ones with unbearable clarity. Cayce said this awareness can feel like carrying a doubled burden, the weight of their own despair and the pain they cause to others. Yet, he insisted, this awareness is also the seed of healing. By seeing the ripple effects of their act, the soul begins to understand the sacredness of life and the importance of endurance. What begins as torment slowly becomes a lesson that deepens the soul's compassion. In this way, even despair can lead to growth, though through a long and difficult path. Another key point Cayce made was that suicide never erases divine love. He rejected the idea of eternal damnation. Instead, he taught that every soul is a child of God, and no action, however tragic, can sever that connection. He often repeated that God is patient beyond human imagination. Even when a soul wanders in confusion, lost in the shadow of its own decision, God's light remains constant. The soul may resist it, may not see it, may even run from it, but eventually it will return. This message gave hope to countless families who felt condemned alongside their loved one. Cayce showed them that despair is temporary, but love is eternal. During the years after World War II, when many families were broken by loss and trauma, Cayce's words on suicide became a source of comfort. He reminded them that despair does not define the soul forever. He also encouraged people to see the importance of service to others as a way to prevent such tragedies. According to him, when we extend compassion, kindness, and presence to those around us, we help prevent the illusion of isolation that drives many to suicide. In his eyes, the fight against despair was not only spiritual, but also communal. By living with empathy and supporting one another, we participate in God's work of saving souls even before they reach the breaking point. This message remains as relevant now as it was then, calling us to create communities of love where no one feels invisible. Cayce also explained that suicide places the soul in a state where time feels very different from the earthly experience. He said that while on earth we measure time in hours, days, and years, on the spiritual plane after suicide, moments of confusion can feel like long stretches that seem endless. The soul may remain trapped in a loop of memory, replaying the circumstances of its choice, not as punishment, but as a natural result of unresolved consciousness. However, he assured those listening that these states are never permanent. Eventually, with the help of divine guidance and the prayers of loved ones, the soul begins to break free from the cycle and move toward understanding. This truth brought comfort to families, reminding them that although the process could be long, it always leads toward light. In some sessions, Cayce even described how these souls are gently guided into environments of healing on the other side. He spoke of realms where compassionate beings work with confused souls, almost like spiritual hospitals. These spaces are not places of fire or eternal torment, but of gradual recovery, where the soul is taught, nurtured, and encouraged to face what it left unfinished. Cayce emphasized that the love of God is more like that of a patient parent than a harsh judge. The focus is not on condemning the soul, but on helping it find strength to continue its eternal journey. This vision stood in stark contrast to more fearful religious teachings of his time, offering instead a message of responsibility balanced with hope. Families who came to Cayce often carried unbearable guilt, wondering if they could have prevented their loved one's death. Cayce's words consistently offered them relief. He said that while we each carry responsibility for our choices, no single act of another person defines the eternal destiny of their soul. He urged families to release self-condemnation and instead focus their energy on sending love, prayers, and forgiveness. This, he explained, not only helps the departed soul, but also begins to heal the hearts of those left behind. His message was clear. Grief can either chain us in sorrow or become a channel of healing. The choice belongs to us. At the same time, Cayce never minimized the seriousness of suicide. He wanted people to understand that life's challenges, no matter how unbearable, are part of a larger plan that cannot be escaped without consequences. He compared life's struggles to medicine, bitter, difficult to swallow, but necessary for healing and growth. To refuse the lesson is to delay the cure. Yet he always balanced this with compassion, reminding everyone that God's patience ensures that no delay lasts forever. Eventually, every soul returns to the lessons it must learn, and every soul is restored. His teachings held a delicate balance, sobering in their honesty, yet radiant in their mercy. One of the most moving elements in Cayce's readings was his insistence that love never stops working. He said that even when a soul has fallen into despair and chosen suicide, the bonds of love from family, friends, and even strangers remain active. He described love as an energy that transcends the veil between worlds, reaching the most isolated corners of the spiritual realm. According to Cayce, this is why acts of kindness, prayer, and forgiveness are never wasted. They become guiding lights that the confused soul can eventually see and follow. He even suggested that souls who are lifted by these energies often return in future lives with a deeper sensitivity to compassion, because they have experienced firsthand how love can rescue even in the darkest hour. Cayce also explained that while suicide complicates the soul's path, it does not define its eternity. He compared it to a student who leaves the classroom before finishing the exam. The test is not erased, it simply waits. When the soul reincarnates, the unfinished lessons will appear again, often with the same themes: loneliness, illness, rejection or loss, until the spirit learns endurance and discovers strength through faith. Though this can sound heavy, Cayce always balanced it with hope. He said that these repeated lessons are not punishments, but opportunities for greater growth, because the soul becomes stronger with each attempt. Over time, what once felt unbearable can transform into a source of wisdom and compassion for others. In his view, one of the most sacred responsibilities of the living is to stand as intercessors for those who died by suicide. Cayce encouraged families to pray not only for peace but also for clarity and courage for the departed soul. He insisted that these prayers create actual conditions in the spiritual dimension, like bridges that help the wandering soul cross into the realms of light. This teaching empowered many who once felt helpless, giving them a role in their loved one's healing process. It also reminded them that love is an active force, not just a memory. By choosing to forgive, bless, and uplift the soul, they could help shorten its time of confusion and guide it toward hope. Finally, Cayce left us with a truth that ties everything together. No matter how painful the act of suicide, no soul is ever abandoned. Divine patience outlasts every shadow, and God's mercy is larger than human despair. He acknowledged the sorrow, the confusion, and the delays, but always returned to this truth, that every soul, without exception, is destined for healing, for growth, and for reunion with the Creator. This message still echoes today as both a warning and a promise. Life should not be cut short, but even when it is, redemption remains possible. And now, as we close this reflection, I invite you once more. If this message touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments, and I will mark each one with a heart to honor your voice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so these teachings of Cayce can continue to inspire and bring light to those who need it most. Edgar Cayce once revealed something so unsettling, so precise, that it forever changed the way people understood death. He said the soul does not drift aimlessly after the body dies. Instead, it follows a sacred pattern, an exact sequence of days, each filled with meaning and transformation. And according to Cayce, the first 21 days are among the most decisive. They shape whether the soul finds peace, confusion, or purpose in the world beyond. Imagine this moment. Your body has stopped. The last breath has left your lungs and silence fills the room. Yet Cayce insisted, this is not the end. It is the beginning of the soul's most mysterious passage. In those first hours, awareness doesn't shut down, it expands. You see everything. You feel the grief of your loved ones. You sense the weight of your own departure. But you also begin to realize that you are no longer bound to the body lying still before you. Cayce described this transition as both liberating and terrifying. The soul, in its earliest stage, clings instinctively to the physical form it has just left behind. During the first 3 days, he said, it lingers close, watching, listening, even trying to reach out. It observes funerals, it hears prayers, and sometimes it desperately tries to send a signal to those it loved. Some families have reported sudden chills, flickering lights, or waves of emotion that sweep through the room without explanation. Cayce explained these as the soul's last attempts to connect before being drawn into the greater reality beyond. It is not imagination. It is the echo of a soul realizing its separation. And in this liminal stage, he said, the soul begins its first review, a confrontation with everything it has done, felt, and intended in life. This is not judgment by an outside force. It is judgment by the higher self, stripped of illusion, seeing truth in its purest form. By the fourth day, Cayce noted, something shifts. The pull begins. The soul starts to detach from the immediate environment and is drawn toward what he called the intermediate plane. This is not heaven or hell, it is a mirror. The soul gravitates toward conditions that reflect its true inner state. A life of kindness, compassion, and growth might translate into a luminous realm of peace. A life steeped in anger, greed, or cruelty could manifest as confusion or darkness. Cayce insisted this was not punishment, it was resonance. The soul attracts the environment that mirrors what it has carried within, and in this place guides appear, familiar presences, souls encountered in previous incarnations, or higher beings that radiate calm. Their presence reassures the newly departed, you are not alone. The journey continues. It is here, in these early days, that the soul begins to understand that death is not silence, but awareness unfolding in a new dimension. As the days progress toward the end of the first week, Cayce said, the soul encounters other spirits. Some are relatives, others are strangers traveling their own paths. Communication here is not with words, but with thought. Telepathy, Cayce explained, is the universal language of the afterlife. In this realm, emotions and thoughts are visible. They shape surroundings. If the soul carries guilt, it may experience environments filled with heaviness or shadows. If it carries love, it is wrapped in warmth and light. According to Cayce, this is when many souls learn a profound truth. Consciousness creates reality. What you think and feel does not just remain inside, it becomes the very landscape you inhabit. For some, this realization is liberating. For others, it is haunting. Souls who cannot let go of regret or anger may remain entangled in this intermediate state, held back by their own unresolved emotions. Yet those willing to release, to forgive, and to open themselves move further along the path. Between the 8th and the 14th day, Cayce revealed that the soul enters a stage of deeper recognition. No longer just observing or drifting, it begins to feel a profound pull toward what he described as the realms of learning. During this period, the soul's awareness expands beyond the personal and immediate. Memories from the life just lived flood forward, but now they are accompanied by glimpses of other experiences, past incarnations faintly breaking through the veil. Cayce explained that the soul, having stabilized after the initial shock of separation, becomes ready to face larger truths about its own journey. It may sense the presence of figures of authority in the spiritual dimension, elders, teachers, or luminous guides who radiate both compassion and firmness. Their role is not to condemn, but to reveal. And as the soul listens, it realizes that its existence is part of a grand continuum stretching across centuries and lifetimes. Cayce described this time as the threshold of education in the afterlife. Many souls, he said, are guided into what he called the Hall of Records, or the Temple of Learning. Though often interpreted symbolically, Cayce insisted these were very real dimensions within the spiritual world. Here the soul is confronted with visions that are not always easy to bear. It sees the ripple effects of its actions, how one choice influenced another person's life, how moments of kindness created echoes of healing, and how acts of harm left wounds that carried forward. This experience is not about guilt, it is about clarity. The soul, Cayce said, cannot lie to itself here. Stripped of excuses and illusions, it is forced to see not just what it did, but who it became through those actions. For many, this is the first time they truly understand the weight of free will. The environment of these days reflects that lesson. Cayce explained that the soul may find itself in radiant halls filled with light, surrounded by energies that lift and inspire, or in dimmer spaces where its unresolved struggles are mirrored back. Yet always, he emphasized, there are guides. The soul is never abandoned. Even when faced with its darkest memories, it is held in an atmosphere of teaching rather than condemnation. The purpose of these revelations is growth, not despair. And for the souls that open to this process, these days become a time of profound healing. They begin to recognize patterns stretching across lives, mistakes repeated, lessons postponed, but also victories achieved and love expressed. The awareness of continuity grows stronger. The soul begins to grasp. Nothing is wasted. Every moment, every choice has been part of a larger design. By the second week, Cayce said, the soul often hears what he called a calling. This is not a sound, not a voice in the air, but a deep inner knowing. It is as if the soul suddenly becomes aware of a summons from beyond itself, an invitation to continue toward higher realms of understanding. Some souls resist this pull, still clinging to earthly attachments, relationships, or unfinished desires. Others follow it eagerly, sensing that it leads to greater truth. According to Cayce, this calling draws the soul closer to its soul group, the cluster of spirits with whom it has shared countless lifetimes. The recognition of these familiar presences brings comfort and belonging. For the first time since death, the soul feels not only guided, but embraced, part of a community that transcends a single incarnation. From the 15th day onward, Cayce explained, the soul reaches a critical threshold. This stage is not about clinging to memories of the life just lived. It is about preparing to integrate them into the broader arc of existence. He said that by the third week, the soul begins to remember not only its most recent journey on Earth, but also threads from other incarnations. These are not vague flashes, but vivid realizations that link past and present into a single continuum. Some souls are shaken as they see how unresolved lessons echo across centuries. Others are uplifted as they witness the long chain of growth, love, and service carried from life to life. Cayce emphasized that this remembrance is not random. It has purpose. The soul is shown exactly what it needs to understand at this stage, no more, no less. And through this unveiling, it begins to sense the larger design of its evolution. The atmosphere of these days is one of revelation. Cayce describes souls being guided into what many later interpreted as the Temple of Wisdom, a dimension where higher beings unveil the deeper structure of existence. Here, the soul perceives that nothing was accidental. Every relationship, every triumph, every sorrow carried meaning. Even the smallest choices contributed to shaping the eternal self. For some, this realization is liberating. It dissolves the fear that life was meaningless. For others, it is humbling, as they see the weight of missed opportunities and the repetition of errors. But always, Cayce said, there is an undercurrent of hope. The purpose of these revelations is not despair, but empowerment. The soul is given the chance to choose anew, to commit itself to higher growth, to embrace the possibility of returning to Earth or advancing in realms of service. By the 20th day, the soul stands at a crossroads. According to Cayce, this is when many souls make what he called a sacred vow. It is not a vow imposed from outside, but one born from within, a deep recognition of what must be done. Some souls choose to rest, to remain in the spiritual realms for further learning and renewal. Others, stirred by the awareness of unfinished growth, pledge to return in another incarnation. This decision, Cayce emphasized, is not forced. It arises naturally from the soul's expanded vision. In this moment, the eternal self looks across lifetimes and sees where the work of love and healing is still incomplete. And so, by its own free will, it chooses the path forward. On the 21st day, Cayce revealed, a profound shift takes place. The soul, now fully detached from the confusion of earthly death, stands in the presence of its higher self. This is not the personality it wore on earth, not the roles it played in a single life. This higher self is radiant, timeless, the truest essence of what it has always been. Meeting it is like returning home after a long exile. It is here that the soul feels its deepest peace since leaving the body. It understands that death was never the end, it was a passage. It sees clearly that its existence stretches far beyond one lifetime, that it belongs to a continuum of learning, love, and divine purpose. And with this recognition, the soul steps fully into the reality of the afterlife, no longer lost, no longer searching, but aware. This is why Cayce insisted the first 21 days are sacred. They shape the soul's direction, they open the doors of remembrance, and they prepare it for the vast journey ahead. Cayce often reminded his audiences that what happens in those first 21 days is not predetermined, it is shaped by the way we live now. He insisted that every choice we make, every thought we cultivate, and every act of love or cruelty becomes part of the soul's environment, after death. During the Great Depression, when families came to him in desperation, he warned them that wealth and status would mean nothing beyond the grave, but that kindness, service, and spiritual awareness would become the only currency that mattered. In one of his readings, he explained that even a simple act of forgiveness could echo into the afterlife, surrounding the soul with light at the very moment it departs the body. These teachings struck his listeners with both fear and hope. Fear, because they realized nothing could be hidden. Hope, because even in their darkest moments, they still had the power to create a more luminous path. This is why the 21-day cycle is so transformative. It functions like a mirror, reflecting back the essence of how one has lived. Souls who cultivated compassion often feel embraced immediately by the presence of guides, while those who lived in selfishness may wander through shadows until they release what binds them. Cayce emphasized again and again that no soul is ever abandoned. Even in confusion, help is near. Even in despair, guidance awaits. The difference lies in whether the soul accepts it. He explained that many who resist remain caught in a kind of spiritual fog, replaying memories of anger or regret until they finally choose to move forward. And that choice, he said, is always available. This is not eternal punishment. It is self-imposed delay. What makes the first 21 days so decisive is that the soul begins to realize this truth sooner than later. For modern audiences, these insights carry a startling relevance. In a world that often dismisses death as silence or oblivion, Cayce's revelations suggest that our consciousness continues with astonishing clarity. Scientific skeptics in the 1940s dismissed his trances as imagination, yet families who sat with him in Virginia Beach swore that his descriptions of their deceased loved ones were too detailed, too precise to be invention. Stories emerged of souls lingering at funerals, of presences felt in empty rooms, of visions in dreams that mirrored Cayce's accounts of the early afterlife. For the grieving, these readings provided comfort that death was not a disappearance, but a transition. And for those seeking purpose, they offered a sobering reminder. How we live now is the blueprint for what comes next. So what does this mean for you today? It means the journey of your soul is already unfolding, not only after death, but in every moment of life. The 21 days Cayce described are a continuation of choices being made now. If you choose compassion, you are preparing a path of light. If you cling to bitterness, you are weaving shadows into your own future environment. The message is not one of fear, but of empowerment. Cayce believed that once people understood this, they would no longer be afraid of death. Instead, they would live more fully, with more purpose, more love, and more courage. And that is perhaps the greatest legacy of these revelations. During the years of war, when uncertainty about death surrounded almost every American household, Cayce's words carried an even heavier weight. Families in Virginia Beach and across the country would ask him, "Where is my son now? Where is my husband?" His replies often followed the same rhythm. The soul is not gone. It is walking through stages of awareness, and the first 3 weeks are the most delicate. He reminded them that soldiers who died far from home were not abandoned. Just as surely as the grieving families felt pain in Kentucky or Ohio, those departed souls were being guided through the same universal process, staying near the body at first, then being pulled toward realms of reflection, then finally entering the presence of their higher self. To Cayce, geography didn't matter, culture didn't matter. The sequence was the same, whether death came in a hospital bed, on a battlefield, or in silence at home. He used these explanations to dismantle fear. Rather than picturing their loved ones as lost or trapped, he invited people to see them as continuing students in a school much greater than Earth. The 21-day cycle was only the first class, but it was the foundation of all the learning to come. He compared it to a child leaving home for the first time, frightening, uncertain, but ultimately liberating. This metaphor resonated with his listeners, who found comfort in thinking of the afterlife as a place of education rather than punishment. He insisted that God's design was not about vengeance, but about growth. And if growth is the purpose, then death is not an ending, but a continuation of the curriculum. That is why the soul, in those early days, is never left alone. Guides and teachers appear because learning cannot begin without support. Cayce also pointed out that some souls return briefly to comfort the living during this cycle. Dreams, sudden impressions, or unexplained moments of calm in the midst of grief were often reported by families who had lost someone. He explained that these were not hallucinations. They were permitted crossings, moments when the veil grew thin enough for the departed to deliver a final reassurance. But he warned, such contacts are temporary. The soul cannot linger indefinitely without delaying its own progress. This reminder gave families peace, while also teaching them the importance of letting go. To cling too tightly, Cayce said, was to tether the soul to the very attachments it needed to release. Love should not bind, it should bless. This teaching remains as relevant today as it was nearly a century ago. In a culture where many still fear death or avoid speaking of it, Cayce's revelations give language to what is often left unsaid. They remind us that we are more than flesh, more than breath, more than memory. We are souls eternal and conscious, walking through carefully designed stages that reveal who we truly are. And the first 21 days after death are the threshold where everything begins. If we live with awareness of this truth, then the moment of our departure need not terrify us. It can become what Cayce called a sacred awakening, a return to the self we were always meant to recognize. Cayce never softened the truth. The soul's journey in those first weeks is both beautiful and demanding. He said the process strips away every mask. The roles we played on earth, our jobs, our titles, even our reputations, fall away instantly. What remains is the essence of what we truly carried inside. For some, this unveiling is a relief, like taking off a heavy costume. For others, it is a shock, as all pretenses are exposed at once. That is why the guides and teachers appear, to steady the soul during this vulnerable period. Their task is not to punish, but to remind, not to scold, but to point the way forward. And every soul, Cayce assured, no matter how broken or burdened, is offered this guidance. None are forgotten. None are left in darkness without a hand reaching through. The only question is whether the soul will recognize and accept that help. It was in the context of ordinary people, farmers in Kentucky, mothers in Virginia Beach, workers worn down by the Depression, that Cayce delivered these insights. They were not abstract theories, they were answers to desperate questions. He explained that when a loved one dies, the prayers of the living become like signals of light reaching across the divide. Souls in the 21-day passage feel them. They are strengthened by them. That is why Cayce encouraged families not to despair, but to pray, to hold thoughts of peace and release. These thoughts, he said, are like bridges, helping the soul cross more easily into the realm where its higher self waits. Imagine what that means. Your silent prayer, your whispered goodbye, your tearful blessing. They are not empty gestures. They are currents of real power that shape the environment your loved one experiences in the afterlife. By the end of the third week, when the soul stands before its higher self, all of this converges. The life lived, the memories reviewed, the lessons revealed, the calling heard, the soul group embraced. All of it culminates in a single moment of clarity. And in that clarity, the soul decides rest, return, or rise. This is why Cayce insisted that life on earth matters so deeply. The way we live today is the material our soul must work with tomorrow. Every kindness becomes a light. Every cruelty becomes a shadow. And in the 21st day, when we face ourselves without illusion, these lights and shadows form the reality we cannot escape. The good news, Cayce said, is that we are always free to choose differently. Every soul is given another chance, another path, another step toward wholeness. Death does not end choice, it magnifies it. So when we speak of the mystery of the first 21 days, we are not speaking of something distant or irrelevant. We are speaking of your journey, my journey, the journey of every human who will ever live. Cayce's revelations do more than describe the afterlife. They challenge us to live with more intention now, to forgive more readily, to love more fiercely, to serve more humbly, because all of it will be waiting for us when our own moment arrives. That is the sacred weight of these teachings. They are not meant to frighten us, but to awaken us to the eternal truth, that we are spiritual beings, temporarily clothed in flesh, destined for a passage far greater than any earthly chapter. Now that you understand what Cayce revealed about the first 21 days after death, the question turns back to you. What are you doing today that your soul will carry into that journey? Cayce insisted that nothing is wasted. Every moment of kindness becomes light in the afterlife. Every act of forgiveness becomes a bridge. Every thought of love becomes a shield. And the opposite is also true. Resentment, cruelty, and selfishness do not vanish when the body dies. They travel with the soul and shape what it experiences in those sacred weeks. The good news is that you are not powerless. Right now, in this very moment, you are writing the script your soul will live after death. And knowing this truth should not fill you with fear, it should fill you with purpose. Because if the afterlife is a mirror, then every loving choice today polishes that mirror with light. So the invitation is simple. Live as if those 21 days begin now. Speak the words of kindness you have been holding back. Offer the forgiveness you've delayed. Share the love you thought could wait until tomorrow. Because tomorrow is never guaranteed, but the soul's journey always is. Cayce's message was never about predicting death. It was about preparing for life. Life that continues, life that evolves, life that expands beyond the grave. If these revelations stirred something inside you, let us know in the comments. We read every single one, and when your words add light to the conversation, we'll mark them with a heart as our way of saying thank you. And don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this message with someone who needs it. Together, we are building a community that faces death not with fear, but with understanding, and that faces life not with despair, but with courage. Remember, the soul is eternal and the journey never ends. In 1944, Edgar Cayce's stenographer stopped typing mid-sentence during reading 575612 because what came through about dying in your sleep was so shocking that even she couldn't believe what she was hearing. In over 14,000 documented readings, Cayce uncovered secrets about consciousness that most people will never discover in their lifetime. And what I'm about to share with you has been hidden in the archives of the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach for over 80 years. Before we dive deep into these revelations, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to learn from Cayce's actual documented readings will transform your understanding of death, sleep, and the journey of your soul forever. This isn't speculation or theory. These are word-for-word transcripts from the most thoroughly documented psychic in American history. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to die so peacefully in their sleep, while others struggle? Have you ever felt like you were somewhere else entirely during a deep dream, only to wake up wondering if it was real? Have you ever had the strange sensation of floating above your body during sleep? Cayce's readings reveal that these experiences are more connected than you could ever imagine, and they're actually preparing you for something far greater than you realize. In the next hour, I'm going to share with you 7 documented revelations from Edgar Cayce's readings that will change how you see sleep and death forever. First, the shocking truth about what your consciousness actually does when your body sleeps, and why this matters for your spiritual evolution. Second, a documented case from reading 136-18 that proves death during sleep isn't what you think it is. Third, the forbidden knowledge about why some souls choose to transition during sleep and what this means for their spiritual advancement. Fourth, Cayce's revelations about the silver cord and how it functions during sleep versus death. Fifth, documented cases of people who communicated with deceased loved ones during their final sleep before dying. Sixth, the connection between meditation practices and peaceful death during sleep. And seventh, practical methods Cayce provided for preparing your consciousness for eventual spiritual transition. But first, let me tell you about something that happened in Virginia Beach in 1944 that shocked even Cayce's most trusted stenographer, Gladys Davis, a woman who had transcribed thousands of readings and thought she had heard everything. During reading 575612, Edgar Cayce was asked about a woman named Helen Morrison who had died peacefully in her sleep after years of illness. What came through during this reading was so unexpected that Gladys actually stopped typing mid-sentence and looked up at the people in the room with wide eyes. Cayce revealed that this woman's soul had been preparing for transition for months, using her sleep state to gradually acclimate to higher spiritual dimensions. But here's what made everyone in that room gasp. Cayce explained that Helen had been attending what he called soul school during her sleep for over 6 months before her physical death. During these nocturnal journeys, her consciousness would travel to spiritual realms where advanced souls taught her about the transition process, showed her the beauty of the afterlife, and helped her release any fears about leaving her physical body. But wait, here's where it gets incredible. Cayce revealed that during deep sleep, our consciousness naturally separates from the physical body and travels through what he called the borderland between physical and spiritual realms. This isn't just metaphorical language or poetic description. In reading 57542, he described specific cases where individuals would visit deceased relatives during sleep, receiving guidance and preparation for their own eventual transition. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like just another psychic's interpretation, but remember, Edgar Cayce's readings were documented by professional stenographers, witnessed by hundreds of people, including doctors, lawyers, and clergy, and archived at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. These aren't stories or interpretations. These are word-for-word transcripts of what came through during his psychic states, and many of these readings were verified by the people who received them. Here's what changes everything about how we understand death during sleep. In reading 26286, Cayce revealed that the soul doesn't actually die suddenly when the body stops functioning during sleep. Instead, he described a gradual process where consciousness slowly withdraws from the physical form, often over several hours or even days before the physical death occurs. This process, he explained, is so gentle that the individual often doesn't even realize they're transitioning until they're already fully in the spiritual realm. This explains why many nurses and doctors report that patients who die peacefully in their sleep often seem to be communicating with invisible presences in the days leading up to their passing. They'll speak to deceased family members, describe beautiful places they're visiting, or express excitement about going somewhere wonderful. Cayce's readings suggest these individuals are already beginning their transition, meeting spiritual guides and deceased loved ones who help facilitate the crossing. But here's the part that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about sleep itself. Cayce revealed in reading 57541 that every single night when you sleep, you're actually practicing for death. Your consciousness leaves your physical body, travels through spiritual dimensions, and then returns. The only difference between sleep and death is that during sleep, the silver cord described in biblical texts remains intact, allowing consciousness to return to the body. Think about this for a moment. How many times have you had dreams so vivid, so real that you woke up questioning whether they actually happened? How many times have you dreamed of places you've never been, but that felt more familiar than your own home? According to Cayce's documented readings, these experiences aren't just dreams created by your sleeping brain. They're actual spiritual journeys your soul takes while your body rests. In reading 13683, Cayce described the case of a man named Robert Patterson, who came to him because he was terrified of dying in his sleep. This man had been having recurring dreams where he would find himself in beautiful, ethereal landscapes, meeting people he had never seen before but somehow recognized. These dreams were so real that he would wake up feeling more rested and peaceful than he had in years, but they also filled him with an inexplicable fear about what they might mean. Cayce revealed that Robert's soul was naturally gifted at conscious projection during sleep, and what he was experiencing were actual visits to spiritual realms where souls go after physical death. The people he was meeting were advanced souls who were teaching him about higher dimensions of existence. Rather than being something to fear, these experiences were actually preparing Robert for his own eventual spiritual evolution. But wait, there's something even more remarkable that Cayce revealed about why some souls choose to transition during sleep. In reading 1968-2, he explained that dying during sleep is often a soul's way of avoiding the trauma and fear that can interfere with a smooth spiritual transition. The soul, working through the subconscious mind, actually orchestrates the timing of physical death to occur during sleep, when the conscious mind's fears and resistance are at their lowest. This changes everything about how we should view death during sleep. Rather than seeing it as random or unfortunate, Cayce's readings suggest it's often a sign of spiritual wisdom and preparation. The soul, in its infinite wisdom, chooses the path of least resistance for its transition to higher dimensions of existence. Let me share with you one of the most documented and verified cases from Cayce's files that proves this point. In 1943, a woman named Margaret Thompson approached Cayce because her elderly father, William, had been having what she described as visitation dreams for several months. In these dreams, her deceased mother, Sarah, would appear to him, showing him beautiful gardens and peaceful places, always encouraging him not to be afraid of what was coming. During reading 3976-15, Cayce revealed that Sarah's spirit was indeed visiting William and preparing him for his own transition. Cayce explained that Sarah was showing William the spiritual realms where they would be reunited, helping him understand that death was not an ending, but a beautiful beginning. 3 weeks after this reading, William died peacefully in his sleep, with a smile on his face that his daughter said looked like he was greeting an old friend. Margaret later reported that in his final days, William seemed more at peace than he had been in years, often mentioning the beautiful places he was visiting in his dreams and expressing excitement about seeing Sarah again. The night before he died, he told Margaret, "Your mother is waiting for me in the most beautiful garden you've ever seen. Don't be sad when I go to her tomorrow." Here's what Cayce revealed about the actual process of dying in sleep that most people never know. In reading 2072-14, he described how consciousness doesn't just suddenly leave the body. Instead, there are what he called practice departures that can occur for weeks or even months before physical death. During these experiences, the soul gradually becomes accustomed to existing without physical form, learning to navigate spiritual dimensions and preparing for permanent transition. But here's the shocking part that even surprised Cayce's closest associates. In several readings, including 5756-27, Cayce revealed that some individuals actually choose their moment of death during sleep because they've received spiritual guidance about optimal timing for their soul's evolution. This timing often coincides with astrological configurations, spiritual development milestones, or the completion of important karmic lessons. Think about what this means. Your loved ones who passed peacefully in their sleep weren't victims of random circumstances. According to Cayce's documented readings, they were working with spiritual guides and higher wisdom to ensure their transition occurred at the perfect moment for their soul's journey and spiritual advancement. Now, you might be wondering about your own sleep experiences and what they might mean for your spiritual development. Cayce addressed this extensively in his readings about soul development and consciousness expansion, providing detailed guidance for individuals seeking to understand their nocturnal spiritual journeys. In reading 57543, Cayce explained that individuals who have vivid, meaningful dreams or out-of-body experiences during sleep are often souls who are spiritually advanced and naturally gifted at conscious projection. These experiences aren't just random neural firings or psychological phenomena, they're actual spiritual journeys that serve as preparation for eventual soul evolution and conscious spiritual advancement. Cayce also revealed in reading 26289 that certain souls incarnate with specific abilities to travel consciously during sleep states. These individuals often report dreams of flying, visiting distant places, or communicating with deceased loved ones. Rather than dismissing these experiences as mere dreams, Cayce encouraged people to pay attention to them as legitimate spiritual experiences. But wait, there's something else Cayce revealed that connects sleep, death, and spiritual awakening in a way most people never consider. In reading 262-20, he described how meditation and prayer before sleep can actually enhance the soul's ability to travel consciously during sleep states, making the eventual transition at death much smoother and more conscious. This is why many spiritual traditions emphasize evening prayers and meditation. According to Cayce's readings, these practices aren't just for relaxation or stress relief, they're actually training for conscious spiritual travel and eventual conscious death. When you meditate before sleep, you're essentially preparing your consciousness to remain aware during the separation process that occurs naturally during sleep. Let me share with you one more documented case that illustrates this perfectly. In 1942, a meditation group in Virginia Beach asked Cayce about a member named Dorothy Williams, who had recently died in her sleep after years of dedicated spiritual practice. Dorothy had been part of their prayer and meditation circle for over a decade, and her peaceful death had left them wondering about the connection between spiritual practice and peaceful transition. In Reading 26277, Cayce revealed that Dorothy's years of meditation and spiritual study had prepared her consciousness to remain aware and active during her transition, allowing her to help guide other souls who were also crossing over. He explained that Dorothy's dedication to spiritual development had earned her the privilege of becoming what he called a transition guide for other souls, making the journey from physical to spiritual existence. Here's what changes everything about how you should think about your own sleep and spiritual preparation. Cayce's reading suggests that every night offers an opportunity to practice conscious spiritual travel, to meet with guides and teachers, and to prepare your consciousness for eventual evolution beyond physical form. Your sleep isn't just downtime for your body, it's graduate school for your soul. In Reading 5754-2, Cayce provided specific guidance for individuals who wanted to develop more conscious awareness during sleep states. He recommended keeping a dream journal to track spiritual experiences, practicing meditation before sleep to enhance conscious projection, and setting the intention to remember and learn from spiritual experiences that occur during sleep. Cayce also emphasized the importance of creating the right conditions for spiritual travel during sleep. In Reading 136-7, he explained that the bedroom environment, the individual's mental state before sleep, and their spiritual preparation all influence the quality and consciousness of nocturnal spiritual journeys. But here's the most profound revelation from Cayce's readings about death during sleep. In Reading 1472-12, he explained that souls who transition peacefully during sleep often do so because they've completed their earthly lessons and are ready for their next phase of spiritual development. Their peaceful departure is actually a graduation, not a tragedy. It's a sign that the soul has successfully completed its earthly curriculum and is ready for advanced spiritual education in higher dimensions. This completely reframes how we should view the death of loved ones during sleep. Rather than seeing it as sudden or unexpected, Cayce's readings suggest we should recognize it as a sign of spiritual completion and conscious choice. The soul, in its wisdom, has determined that its earthly lessons are complete and has chosen the gentlest possible method of transition. Cayce also revealed in Reading 3976-29 that souls who die peacefully in their sleep often continue to serve as guides and teachers for souls still in physical incarnation. Their gentle transition allows them to maintain a strong connection to the physical realm while operating from higher spiritual dimensions, making them ideal helpers for those still learning earthly lessons. Now, let's explore what Cayce revealed about the silver cord and its role in sleep versus death. In Reading 57548, he described the silver cord as the energetic connection that allows consciousness to travel outside the physical body during sleep while maintaining the ability to return. This cord, he explained, is mentioned in biblical texts and is a real energetic phenomenon that connects the physical body to the spiritual body. During sleep, the silver cord stretches to allow consciousness to travel great distances while remaining connected to the physical form. During death, this cord is consciously severed by the soul when it's ready to permanently transition to spiritual existence. Cayce revealed that this severance is always a conscious choice made by the soul, never an accident or random occurrence. In Reading 2622-15, Cayce described cases where individuals experienced near-death situations during sleep, but were pulled back to physical existence because their silver cord remained intact and their soul determined that their earthly mission wasn't complete. These individuals often reported traveling through tunnel-like passages toward brilliant light, meeting deceased loved ones, and being told it wasn't their time to stay. But here's something remarkable that Cayce revealed about advanced souls and their relationship with the silver cord. In Reading 57564, he explained that spiritually advanced individuals can learn to consciously control their silver cord, allowing for more extensive and conscious spiritual travel during sleep. These individuals often become bridges between physical and spiritual realms, bringing back important information and guidance for others. Cayce also addressed the question of what happens to consciousness immediately after the silver cord is severed during death. In reading 136-21, he explained that consciousness doesn't immediately lose all connection to the physical realm. Instead, there's a period of adjustment where the newly transitioned soul learns to operate purely in spiritual dimensions while still maintaining awareness of loved ones in physical incarnation. This adjustment period, Cayce revealed, is why many people report sensing the presence of recently deceased loved ones, receiving signs or communications, or feeling their guidance during difficult times. The newly transitioned soul is learning to communicate from spiritual dimensions while offering comfort and support to those still in physical existence. Let me share another documented case that illustrates this beautifully. In 1945, a woman named Elizabeth Carter came to Cayce devastated by the sudden death of her husband during sleep. During reading 1567-2, Cayce revealed that her husband's soul was actually trying to communicate with her during her own sleep states, offering comfort and showing her that his transition had been peaceful and beautiful. Cayce encouraged Elizabeth to pay attention to her dreams and to trust the communications she was receiving from her husband during sleep. He explained that the bond of love between souls transcends physical death, and that her husband was using their shared love as a bridge to maintain contact during her grieving process. Now, let's explore what Cayce revealed about preparing for conscious death through spiritual practice. In reading 262-31, he explained that individuals who dedicate themselves to spiritual development during physical life are preparing their consciousness for eventual conscious transition. This preparation involves learning to separate consciousness from physical identification while maintaining full awareness of spiritual identity. Cayce recommended several specific practices for this preparation. Daily meditation helps consciousness become comfortable operating independently of physical form. Prayer and spiritual study expand awareness of spiritual dimensions and realities. Service to others develops the soul qualities needed for advanced spiritual existence. And conscious dream work during sleep provides practical experience in spiritual travel and communication. In reading 5754-11, Cayce revealed that souls who die consciously during sleep often do so because they've mastered these spiritual practices during their lifetime. Their conscious death becomes the final demonstration of their spiritual development, showing that they've learned to identify with spiritual rather than physical existence. But here's something that might surprise you about Cayce's teachings on death during sleep. In reading 1968-7, he revealed that some souls specifically choose incarnations where they will transition during sleep because this method of death allows them to serve as examples and teachers for others. Their peaceful transitions help reduce fear of death in those who witness or learn about their experience. These souls, Cayce explained, often incarnate with specific missions to demonstrate the beauty and peace of conscious spiritual transition. Their lives and deaths serve as teaching tools for others who are developing spiritually and learning about the true nature of existence beyond physical form. Cayce also addressed the question of timing in death during sleep. In reading 3976-8, he revealed that the timing of death during sleep is never random, but is always coordinated with spiritual law and the soul's evolutionary needs. This timing often coincides with completion of karmic obligations, achievement of spiritual milestones, or optimal conditions for the soul's next phase of development. As we near the conclusion of this exploration of Edgar Cayce's most profound teachings about death during sleep, let's consider the practical implications of these revelations for your own spiritual development and preparation. According to Cayce's readings, you can begin preparing now for your eventual conscious transition by developing the same practices that help consciousness travel during sleep. Regular meditation, spiritual study, service to others, and conscious attention to your dream experiences all contribute to your soul's readiness for eventual spiritual graduation. In reading 262-44, Cayce emphasized that death is not something to fear, but something to prepare for consciously and joyfully. He described it as the soul's graduation from elementary school to advanced spiritual education in higher dimensions of existence. Cayce also revealed that souls who prepare consciously for death during their lifetime often experience more beautiful and expanded spiritual existence after transition. Their preparation allows them to immediately access higher spiritual realms and more advanced forms of service to other souls. Remember, according to America's most documented psychic, death during sleep isn't random, it isn't tragic, and it isn't something to fear. It's often the choice of wise souls who have completed their earthly lessons and are ready for their next great adventure in spiritual existence. The next time you lay down to sleep, remember that according to Edgar Cayce's 14,000 documented readings, you're not just resting your body. You're embarking on a spiritual journey that serves as preparation for the ultimate adventure of consciousness, your eventual conscious transition to purely spiritual existence. Your sleep isn't just downtime, it's training time for your soul's eternal journey. Every night you're practicing the skills you'll need for your final graduation from physical existence to unlimited spiritual life. If this exploration of Edgar Cayce's documented readings has opened your mind to new possibilities about consciousness and spiritual evolution, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone who's ever wondered about the deeper meaning of sleep and death, and let me know in the comments about any vivid dreams or spiritual experiences you've had during sleep. Your experiences might be more significant than you ever imagined, and they could be preparing you for the greatest journey of all. Remember, according to Edgar Cayce's 14,000 documented readings housed in the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, death isn't an ending. It's a conscious graduation to a higher form of existence, and sleep is your nightly practice session for that ultimate spiritual adventure. Every night you're being prepared for the most beautiful journey your soul will ever take. Did you know that cremating a body too soon can cause terrible suffering to the spirit that just departed? This isn't just another religious theory. This is a direct revelation from the spiritual world, documented by America's most respected psychic, Edgar Cayce, known worldwide as the Sleeping Prophet. Here's what will shock you. Through his thousands of life readings, Cayce revealed something deeply disturbing. In one of his most profound sessions, he warned that premature disposal of the body could cause the departing soul to experience confusion and distress, because the silver cord, that ethereal connection between soul and body, doesn't sever immediately upon physical death. But the most shocking revelation came when families started asking Cayce about the specific timing. His spirit guides were crystal clear. There should be a waiting period of at least 72 hours before cremation. Why exactly 72 hours? What happens in the spiritual realm during that time that makes this wait so crucial? Right now, somewhere in the world, families are making cremation decisions without knowing they might be causing unnecessary suffering to their loved ones. Because, according to Cayce's readings, the spirit maintains energetic connections with the physical body for hours or even days after clinical death. Here's where it gets fascinating. Modern science is now confirming what Cayce revealed decades ago. Recent research shows that when a person dies, the brain can take up to 32 hours to completely shut down its final neurons. Skin cells continue dividing for up to 24 hours after clinical death. Coincidence? Cayce was warning us about these processes long before science could document them. Cayce's spirit guides explained with scientific precision what occurs at the moment of death. In one of his most technical sessions on the afterlife, he explained that the vibratory forces of the physical body continue to influence the departing soul until the silver cord, that ethereal connection between soul and body, completely dissolves. This process, according to Cayce, typically requires between 48 to 96 hours, with 72 hours being the average. Imagine for a moment this situation. Your loved one has just passed away, but their spirit still maintains energetic connections with the physical body. It's as if there are invisible cables connecting their spiritual consciousness with the matter they inhabited for decades. If at this critical moment the cremation process begins, what do you think that spirit feels? Cayce's readings reveal disturbing scenarios. In one of his sessions on Earthbound Souls, he described how souls who lived very materialistically often experience what he termed earthbound conditions after death, where they remain psychically attached to physical realm experiences, including sensations related to their former body. In one of his most detailed sessions on the afterlife, he explained that the body physical, the body mental, the body spiritual are one. In the separation there is oft confusion. This confusion can be intensified if the physical form is subjected to intense heat, while these subtle connections still exist. Now comes a revelation that will change your perspective on this topic. When the body is cremated too soon, it can impose on the spirit the same type of suffering it would experience if it were being burned alive, especially if the spirit carries strong attachments to the material body or has much fear of dying. What does this mean in practical terms? A soul very attached to the body, very attached to materialism, or with much fear of dying, naturally remains psychologically attached to their physical remains. If the remains are cremated and that soul is psychically linked to it, they will have the sensation that they are being burned along with the body. This is not a metaphorical description. It's a reality of the spiritual world, documented by Cayce's thousands of readings over decades. Imagine the terror and confusion of a spirit that, without fully understanding their new condition, feels they are being consumed by flames. But wait, because here's something that can reassure many families who have already made the decision to cremate without knowing these guidelines. Cayce's readings clearly indicate that cremation is a legitimate process, and there is no spiritual condemnation for this choice. The method of body disposal doesn't affect the soul's eternal destiny. The problem isn't in cremation itself, but in the timing before the process. During those crucial 72 hours, what Cayce called spiritual benefactors have more time to assist the newly departed spirit in their adaptation process. This period allows the energetic connections to naturally dissolve, minimizing any possibility of suffering during cremation. Cayce described these helpers in one of his most moving readings as ministering angels, who assist souls during transition periods. In this point, I want you to reflect on something personal. If you had to make this decision for a loved one, or if you're planning your own transition, wouldn't you want to know all available options to make this process as smooth as possible? That's exactly the intention of these spiritual teachings. Cayce's readings don't seek to create rigid rules or generate guilt in families. Their objective is to offer knowledge that allows more conscious and informed decisions about one of the most delicate moments in human experience. Now, I want to share additional information that can be very useful. In the United States, where Cayce conducted his work, crematories already offer the option of keeping the body in cold chambers for extended periods. This allows families to comply with the 72-hour recommendation without legal complications. Some crematories report that spiritually minded families commonly request 3 days of waiting, though there are cases of families requesting up to 7 days. Regulations generally allow the body to remain in the refrigeration chamber for as long as the family desires, facilitating compliance with these spiritual guidelines. But here comes something that may surprise many. The 72 hours is not an absolute and rigid number. Cayce's readings support this flexibility. In one of his sessions on the soul's journey, he stated that each soul meets its own self in the transition, meaning that individual spiritual development determines much of the experience. A soul well prepared through spiritual practices and service to others will naturally have an easier transition regardless of external circumstances. Therefore, the 72 hours should be understood as an average time suggestion, not as an inflexible rule. What's important is to understand the principle. Offer sufficient time for the process of separation between spirit and matter to occur in the most natural and least traumatic way possible. This is where Cayce's teachings become especially valuable. He reminds us that more important than any specific rule is the environment of love, respect, and spiritual understanding that surrounds the entire process. Prayers, positive vibrations, and what he called protective spiritual atmosphere are more determining than any rigid protocol. Cayce's readings echo this sentiment. In one of his most compassionate sessions, he emphasized that love is the healing force, and that the prayers and positive thoughts of family members create a protective spiritual atmosphere around the departing soul. Now let me address a concern that many people express. What about families who already cremated their loved ones without knowing these guidelines? Is there any spiritual problem for not having waited 72 hours? Cayce's teachings are reassuring and full of compassion. There is no condemnation or spiritual problem due to ignorance. The spiritual world understands human limitations and circumstances that sometimes prevent ideal compliance with these recommendations. Divine love and understanding encompass all circumstances beyond human control. What really matters is the loving intention, respect for the loved one, and prayers offered during and after the process. Many times, the genuine love of the family and the positive vibrations they generate are more beneficial for the spirit than any protocol followed mechanically without real understanding. This leads us to a deeper understanding of these teachings. It's not about superstitious rules, but about principles of love and charity applied to a specific situation. The objective is always to minimize suffering and maximize favorable conditions for the spirit's adaptation to their new reality. Now, let me share with you some specific cases that will illustrate perfectly these teachings. In one of Edgar Cayce's most documented sessions, he described a soul who had just passed and was experiencing confusion because the cremation occurred within hours of death. The entity reported feeling as if still within the fires and required extensive spiritual intervention to help them understand their new condition. Consider this documented case from Cayce's work. A spirit who had been very materialistic in life and strongly identified with his physical body found himself terrified when his family decided on immediate cremation. Through Cayce's psychic sessions, this soul described the experience as feeling trapped in flames, even though he was no longer physical. It took months of spiritual therapy for him to understand that the sensation was psychological, created by his intense attachment to material form. But here's what's truly remarkable about these revelations. Cayce provided not just warnings, but detailed explanations of the death process itself. His spirit guides explained that during the first 72 hours, what they called the etheric body continues to maintain connections with physical sensations. What makes this even more compelling is the precision of these revelations. Modern medical research has discovered that cellular death doesn't occur immediately upon clinical death. Different organs and tissues die at different rates. The brain can show electrical activity for up to 30 minutes after the heart stops. Some cells continue metabolic processes for hours. But here's the kicker. Recent studies using advanced brain imaging have shown that consciousness itself may persist for several minutes after clinical death, with some researchers suggesting it could continue much longer than previously believed. This scientific discovery was made in 2023, yet Cayce was describing this exact phenomenon decades earlier. Dr. Sam Parnia, a leading researcher in near-death experiences at NYU Langone Medical Center, has documented cases where patients reported detailed awareness of events occurring around their bodies for extended periods after clinical death. His research suggests that consciousness doesn't immediately cease with brain death, exactly what Cayce's spirit guides indicated. Let me tell you about one of the most compelling cases that validates Cayce's teachings. In 1967, a family in Virginia Beach, where Edgar Cayce's Association for Research and Enlightenment is headquartered, faced a decision about cremating their patriarch, who had been a long-time student of Cayce's work. They were aware of Cayce's teachings about the silver cord, but uncertain about timing. Through a medium familiar with Cayce's work, they received guidance that perfectly aligned with the 72-hour recommendation. The family waited 3 full days, during which they maintained vigil with prayers and readings from Cayce's materials. Later, through the same medium, they received communication from their departed family member expressing gratitude for the waiting period, which he said allowed him to release gently from physical attachments. This case illustrates something crucial that Cayce consistently emphasized: the power of family involvement during the transition period. His readings consistently stressed that the thoughts and prayers of loved ones create what he called protective vibrations around the departing soul. But let's address the elephant in the room. What about emergency situations or legal requirements that make the 72-hour waiting period impossible? Cayce's teachings addressed this directly, stating that the love and prayers of those gathered can compensate for circumstances beyond human control. He emphasized that divine law always operates through love and understanding, not rigid adherence to rules when circumstances prevent ideal conditions. However, Cayce strongly recommended that when choice exists, families should opt for the longer waiting period. The reasoning isn't about religious dogma, but about minimizing potential distress for the departing soul. Here's where modern funeral practices actually support these ancient spiritual principles. Most states in the US require a waiting period before cremation anyway, typically 24 to 48 hours for legal documentation and preparation. Many funeral homes now offer extended refrigeration services, making the 72-hour waiting period practically feasible for most families. What's particularly interesting is that some funeral directors report that families requesting longer waiting periods often describe feeling more complete in their grieving process. This aligns with Cayce's teachings that this time benefits not just the departing soul, but also helps family members process their loss more thoroughly. But here's where this story becomes absolutely incredible. What I'm about to share with you will blow your mind. Everything you've just heard about Edgar Cayce's revelations, the 72-hour waiting period, the silver cord, the spiritual connections that persist after death, all of this was being revealed simultaneously by another psychic halfway around the world who had never heard of Edgar Cayce. In Brazil, a humble medium named Francisco Cândido Xavier, known as Chico Xavier, was receiving identical information from the spirit world. But here's the shocking part. Xavier began his mediumistic work in the 1930s completely independently from Cayce and continued until 2002, long after Cayce's death in 1945. When Xavier was asked on Brazil's famous TV program Pinga Fogo in 1971 about cremation, his response was virtually identical to Cayce's guidance. Speaking through his spiritual mentor Emmanuel, Xavier said, "Cremation is legitimate for all those who desire it, provided there is a waiting period of at least 72 hours before cremation in any crematory furnace." The exact same 72-hour recommendation. From two psychics who never met, living on different continents, receiving information from completely different spirit guides. This is either the most incredible coincidence in psychic history or powerful validation that both men were accessing genuine spiritual truth. But the parallels don't stop there. Xavier's spirit guide Emmanuel explained the reason for the waiting period in terms remarkably similar to Cayce's silver cord teaching. Emmanuel said that, in a certain way, there are always many echoes of sensitivity between the discarnate spirit and the body where the vital tone was extinguished in the first hours following the outcome. Sound familiar? It's the same principle Cayce described, that energetic connections persist between soul and body for hours or days after physical death. Even more remarkable, Xavier received communications from a spirit doctor named André Luis, who provided incredibly detailed descriptions of the death process. André Luis explained that the bonds connecting spirit to body are slowly undone, beginning with the extremities and ending in the main organs, the brain and the heart. This matches perfectly with Cayce's descriptions of how the silver cord gradually dissolves, starting from the periphery and working toward the central nervous system. Xavier's spirit guides used different terminology. They called the energetic body the perispirit instead of Cayce's etheric body, but they described identical phenomena. Both sources explained that newly departed spirits often don't immediately understand their new condition because they still feel connected to their physical form. Consider this documented case from Xavier's mediumistic work. A spirit named Roberto, who had been an atheist in life and strongly identified with his physical body, found himself terrified when his family decided on immediate cremation. Through Xavier's psychography, Roberto described the experience as feeling trapped in flames, even though he was no longer physical. This is virtually identical to the case Cayce described of a materialistic soul feeling as if still within the fires after premature cremation. Two different psychics, two different continents, two different decades, but the same spiritual reality being documented. What makes this convergence even more extraordinary is that neither psychic was aware of the other's work when they received these revelations. Cayce was giving readings in Virginia Beach until 1945, while Xavier began his major works in Brazil in the 1930s and continued until 2002. The internet didn't exist, international communication was limited, yet their spirit guides were teaching identical principles. Let me share another fascinating parallel. Cayce's readings frequently mentioned that the departing soul's experience depends heavily on their spiritual development and beliefs during life. In one of his most profound sessions on the afterlife, he stated, "Those who have lived close to the spiritual forces find the transition natural and beautiful. Those who have lived entirely in the material find confusion and often distress." Emmanuel, speaking through Xavier, taught the exact same principle. In The Consoler, he emphasized that spirits who cultivated spiritual values during earthly life experience what he called natural discarnation, while those heavily attached to material pleasures or atheistic beliefs often struggle with the transition process. Both sources indicate that the 72-hour waiting period provides what Cayce called adjustment time and what Emmanuel termed adaptation assistance. During this period, both traditions describe spiritual helpers or guides working to ease the soul's transition. In Cayce's teachings on spiritual assistance, he described these helpers as ministering angels who assist souls in releasing earthly attachments. Xavier's spirit guides, particularly André Luis, provided even more detailed descriptions of this assistance. In Missionaries of the Light, André Luis describes organized rescue teams in the spiritual realm whose sole purpose is helping newly departed souls understand their new condition. This convergence of independent revelation provides extraordinary validation for the 72-hour principle. When two highly documented psychics, working independently across different continents and time periods, receive identical guidance from different spirit sources, it suggests we're dealing with authentic spiritual law rather than cultural belief or personal opinion. Both traditions ultimately teach that death is not an ending, but a graduation to expanded existence. The specific circumstances of that graduation, including cremation timing, matter, but they are secondary to the fundamental spiritual development that each soul must achieve through conscious living. The cremation guidelines, therefore, should be understood as acts of charity and love toward those who may not have achieved optimal spiritual preparation during life. They represent our opportunity to ease the transition for souls who might otherwise experience confusion or distress. Let me share specific practical guidance that emerges from combining both traditions' wisdom. During the 72-hour period, both sources recommend maintaining an atmosphere of peace around the body. Cayce's readings suggest reading spiritual literature aloud, playing soft music, and maintaining what he called harmonious vibrations. Xavier's spirit guides recommend prayer, meditation, and what Emmanuel termed thoughts of liberation, mentally encouraging the spirit to move toward the light. Both traditions emphasize avoiding negative emotions like excessive grief, anger, or family conflicts near the body during this time. Cayce explained in one of his sessions on death that intense negative emotions can create psychic disturbances that confuse the departing soul. Emmanuel taught that such emotions can create what he called magnetic attractions that make it harder for the spirit to release earthly attachments. Now let me address a question I frequently receive. Do these principles apply regardless of religious background? Both Cayce and Xavier's spirit guides were clear that these are universal spiritual laws, not denominational doctrines. Cayce, despite his Christian background, emphasized that his readings revealed universal principles that apply to all souls, regardless of their earthly religious beliefs. He stated in one of his sessions on divine love that God is no respecter of persons, and that spiritual laws operate equally for everyone. Emmanuel, through Xavier, taught that spiritual evolution and the laws governing death and rebirth transcend any single religious system. He emphasized that these principles are based on the soul's eternal nature, not on specific religious beliefs held during earthly life. This universality is actually one of the strongest validations of both sources' authenticity. Neither claimed exclusive revelation for their particular tradition, but rather presented these insights as universal spiritual truths available to all humanity. Here's another remarkable convergence. Both traditions describe the post-death state as involving multiple stages of adaptation. Cayce's readings outline what he called planetary influences and spheres of activity that souls experience based on their earthly development. Xavier's spirit guides, particularly André Louis, described detailed spiritual colonies where souls continue their education and service. While their terminology differs, both describe the immediate post-death period as crucial for determining how smoothly the soul transitions to these higher states of existence. The 72-hour principle serves as a bridge between earthly existence and these expanded spiritual realities. What's particularly fascinating is that some funeral directors report that families requesting longer waiting periods often describe feeling more complete in their grieving process. This aligns with both Cayce's and Xavier's teachings that this time benefits not just the departing soul, but also helps family members process their loss more thoroughly. Here's where modern funeral practices actually support these ancient spiritual principles. Most states require a waiting period before cremation anyway, typically 24 to 48 hours for legal documentation. Many funeral homes now offer extended refrigeration services, making the 72-hour waiting period practically feasible for most families. What emerges from studying both traditions is a profound respect for the transition process itself. Both Cayce and Xavier's spirit guides consistently emphasize that death is one of the most significant experiences in a soul's eternal journey, deserving our most conscious and loving attention. Let me conclude with perhaps the most important insight from both traditions. The ultimate preparation for peaceful transition isn't found in following specific cremation protocols, but in how we live our daily lives. Both Cayce and Xavier's spirit guides consistently emphasize that spiritual preparation during earthly life is the primary factor determining post-death experience. Cayce's teachings state, "The manner of transition depends upon what has been the manner of life." He taught that souls who cultivate love, service, and spiritual awareness during life naturally experience smooth transitions regardless of external circumstances. Emmanuel's teaching through Xavier perfectly parallels this wisdom. In The Consoler, he emphasized that charity, prayer, and self-improvement during earthly existence create the conditions for what he called conscious discarnation, a peaceful, aware transition to spiritual life. The cremation guidelines, therefore, should be understood as acts of charity and love toward those who may not have achieved optimal spiritual preparation during life. They represent our opportunity to ease the transition for souls who might otherwise experience confusion or distress. These teachings from two of history's most documented and consistent psychic sources offer us practical wisdom for one of life's most inevitable experiences. They remind us that true spirituality always manifests as love in action. In this case, love expressed through conscious consideration for the needs of departing souls. Whether you're planning for your own transition or making decisions for loved ones, these principles provide a framework for choices based on spiritual understanding rather than mere convenience or tradition. They invite us to see death not as a termination, but as a sacred transition deserving our most loving and conscious attention. The remarkable convergence between Edgar Cayce and Chico Xavier's revelations about cremation timing provides us with extraordinary validation that we're dealing with authentic spiritual principles. When two independent sources, separated by geography and culture, receive identical guidance from the spirit world, it suggests these are universal truths worthy of our serious consideration.